Hi and welcome back. In today's video I'm going to be thinking about a concept known as using your artistic license. I'm going to be applying it to this photograph of mine that I took of some trees on the edge of a park near where I live. When thinking about painting from a photograph, it's very tempting, especially for beginners, to feel the urge to paint exactly what we see in front of us, every little detail, and to really get worried or discouraged if we can't kind of achieve that kind of level or that quality when we're using a photograph. But with loose painting, and in fact a lot of painting, what's more important is to make your own decisions about simplifying the photograph and about creating what you want from the composition, so that you're not just simply copying the photograph, but you're using your artistic license to make choices about how you want the painting to look. Making these sorts of decisions can seem a bit daunting to start with, especially if you're just setting out with watercolor painting. But the more you practice, the more you try simplifying photographs and turning them into your own unique painting, the more you'll realise and begin to understand how you can make the photograph your own through your painting, so that you're creating a unique work of art rather than a literal copy of the photograph. Of course, this is something that we will all approach in a slightly different way because we're all unique and think differently, but I'll just share the way that I think about this sort of thing, and hopefully it might be of some help to you when you come to tackle your own photograph simplification. Today I'm going to be painting in the style of a line and wash. I'm using my Faber Castell waterproof artist Pitt pens to roughly draw out the shapes of the trees. I've looked at my photograph and I've thought about it, and the things that I love about the photograph is the silhouetted trees, how stark they are against the night sky that's still got some light in it. Now I could just use that ambience or atmosphere and put that into my painting, but I've decided that I'd like to combine quite a dramatic sunset with a moonrise and have those two features. So in that way, because the moon isn't visible in my photograph, I'm using my artistic license to add a moon, because I feel that that's what I'd like to show. I'd like to show a full moon high in the sky above the beautiful colours of sunset, because I think that would look beautiful with these dramatic silhouetted trees. So what I'm doing is looking carefully at the photograph, and while I'm not copying the trees exactly, I'm trying to capture something of the character of each one of the trees or the groups of trees in the photograph. I've chosen to use my brush pen, which has got a nice thick nib, to use that first, and I'm going in for all of my groups of trees and drawing in or roughing out the thickest parts of the trunks and the branches, so that I get a nice strong structure right from the beginning. When you're painting in the line and wash or the pen and wash style, the line work will often be the most time-consuming part of the painting, but it's because it's doing nearly all of the work, and it actually makes the job of the painting much easier, because a lot of us are far more sort of au fait or used to drawing than painting these sorts of details. So, well, I find that anyway. I find that when I'm using a fine liner pen, then I can very quickly work out and do the drawing a lot more easily than using a sort of flexible brush that's a little bit harder to handle fluently. I've now moved to a small fine liner and I'm extending out from those thicker branches, lots of thin branches and twigs across the end, and slowly but surely beginning to bring some shape and form, hopefully, to my trees. This tree on the right is a Scots pine, I think, or something similar to that, and I'm trying to keep that character to this tree because this is going to be the tree whose branches will just trail across my moon, hopefully. So I'm trying to keep that tree a little bit starker, darker, taller and slightly different from the other trees. Using your artistic license or making your own artistic choices as to how you interpret a photograph or a scene in front of you is quite an important thing to get used to being able to do and to learn to feel confident doing. I think beginners can sometimes worry that their ideas for compositions or for changing a photograph or whatever might be, I don't know, a little bit weak or a bit dodgy or not very good, that sort of thing. But the thing is, it's like with everything, the more you try out different ideas, the more success that you'll have, and more importantly, the more confident that you will feel in your own artistic decisions and using your artistic license to create unique works of art. So I can't stress enough that it's really important to practice this sort of thing and to keep painting, even if you aren't particularly happy with what you do to start with. The more you practice out and try out different ideas, the happier you'll become with some of them. If you're just starting out and not feeling very confident about this sort of thing, then a good way to practice could be by making thumbnail sketches. And I'll do a more detailed video about thumbnail sketches at some point. But at the moment, I'll just say that if you're not sure and you've got a photograph that you really want to paint, you're not quite sure what to do with it, then it's a good idea in your sketchbook to make sort of 3 or 4 different versions, very simplified little sketches of different compositions or ideas or different decisions that you could potentially make using your artistic license to simplify and to change the photograph. And that way you'll have the little thumbnail sketches in front of you, and straight away you'll see what's working and what isn't working. And that can be a really good way of starting off your painting. And then once you've decided which composition is working for you, then at that point, then you can begin to think about a full-size painting using that composition. So straight away, you've already discovered something that visually you know will work because you've tried it out with the thumbnail sketching. So back to this painting, I'm just literally scribbling in underneath the trees for my lower sort of foreground area. I'm more or less ignoring the details and the lights and things like that in the photograph. Again, using my artistic license to completely simplify that down and just to have that as a silhouetted landmass from which the trees are growing. The shape of the trees against the sunset and the moonrise, or the rising full moon, will be my focal point, not the ground. So just scribbling across it there, blacking it out and putting it into silhouette should just give me a nice sort of framing device, if you see what I mean, a nice base for my trees. So that's my silhouetted trees and ground completely finished with my waterproof fine liners. I shall leave it for a while to make sure that any of the darker patches of ink have completely dried, and when I'm sure it's completely dry, I'm going to wet it all over using my large Harky brush. Any brush will do, but I'm going to wet it all over because I want to paint my sky using the wet in wet technique, so that it's going to be a very simple, quick, loose, but hopefully effective sky. This is Gamboge. It's a lovely bright yellow. So I'm sweeping that across the sky. My board is at an angle of about 45 degrees tilt. So you can see the paint is beginning to run down the page, but I don't mind. I'm quite happy with that. I'm looking for these colours to diffuse into each other. The second colour for my sunset is alizarin Scarlet Lake, a beautiful rich red, which is going to give me some reds, pinks and sort of orangey tones when it's combined with the Gamboge. Now for the dark of my night sky, I'm using indigo, and then I shall add to that some Paynes grey. I'm going to try and leave some sort of white unpainted parts of the paper just for some slightly paler areas, so it's not completely covered. And once I've got my main colours on, while it's all still wet and running, I'm turning my board 90 degrees around to stop the paint from running straight down the page and off, but to keep it there. And then I'm going to take a 1-inch flat brush. It's clean, it's damp, and I'm just feathering it through the paint that's on the page, just helping to give it a bit more direction, feathering through some finer lines and finer marks. So I'm getting some red into the yellow, some Paynes grey, shadows here and there as well. So just quickly feathering through until it looks the way I want it to look. So I'm very pleased with the decision to use my artistic license to put sunset colours in there. The next thing I'm going to do is to create my moon. I'm taking a coin, wrapping it in a piece of tissue or kitchen towel, wrapping it tightly across the back, so I'm revealing a nice plain circle of kitchen paper or tissue, and I shall press it into the dark paint just here and then pull it off, and that should lift off the paint. And yes, it's lifted off the wet paint, and I've got a nice sort of silvery moon there. So now all that's left for me to do is to just carry on with the paint, particularly with the indigo and Paynes grey mixture, while the paper is still wet, the sky's all still damp, and I can still work it. I can drop in some foliage. I can darken up and put in some sort of slightly more diffused marks across the horizon line or the base, and then start to block in some softly diffused bluey greys across the trees, just to flesh them out a little bit more. I'm using the tips of the Harky brush here and the corner of the Harky brush. I'm making sure my paint isn't too wet. It has to be fairly dry, so I'm dabbing my brush out onto a cloth or a tissue before it goes onto the painting, because I don't want to create any runbacks or cauliflowers. Slightly richer paint here, and that should diffuse nicely and just give me some nice shadowy tree canopies. So I think it's an absolutely joyful thing to be able to feel confident enough to use your artistic license or to make your own choices about changes that you can make to photographs or ideas that you want to paint. It's certainly a way of making a painting that's completely unique to you, to make these sorts of choices. Never feel that you have to follow a photograph exactly when you're painting. It would be very hard to do, and also what's the point in that? You might just as well have the photograph. Now I'm just going to finish off a few final but I think quite important details. With the Scots pine here, I'm going to use the fine liner on the dry painting. It's now completely dried, so I'm just adding some extra details. And what I want is a few of these little branches from the end of the Scots pine coming across the moon. I think that integrates the moon and the picture really well. So it's just these tiny touches that can make all the difference. And I'll do that. I'll add some more branches here and there with either the brush pen or the very fine nibbed pen, here and there across the painting until I get it looking the way I want it to look. I think I'm nearly there, and in this close-up you can see that the marks are all quite scribbly, they're all quite rough, looked at individually, but if you stand back and look at the whole painting, I think that it's quite effective, and that's the beauty of the line and wash technique, especially if you're drawing and painting silhouetted shapes, which can be a really effective motif for beginners. It can give you real confidence if you just focus on the tone and the shape and the outline of a silhouetted tree, and then practice your wet in wet colour blending to create some really beautiful skies, and you're given an instantly beautiful picture. All right, it might take a few goes to get it right, but it's certainly well worth practicing. So now it's time to remove the tape and have a look at the painting and see how it looks. The tape is just ordinary decorator's masking tape. I'm pulling it away from the painting just in case it was to tear the paper, because sometimes it does. But I think that looks quite effective, and I think I've captured something of the photograph and the character of the trees, but the most important thing is that I've made the photograph my own, if you know what I mean. I've made the painting my own by putting my own interpretation on it. I've used my artistic license to make choices about the colours, choices about the composition, how much detail to put in, how much to leave out, and just little extra finishing touches, like the rising moon. I'm just adding a few more details with fine liner here and there, just where I can now look at the painting through fresh eyes. Now the border is revealed. It sort of gives you a new look on the painting. It's like a framing device. And now just a few more marks here and there just to flesh out some of the canopies and branches and just get things balanced up a little bit. Well, I hope that was helpful, especially for beginners that may struggle with the idea of interpreting a photograph in their own way. And I hope that you will practice using your artistic license to create your own beautiful and unique artwork. Thanks so much for watching. Please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And thank you so much to my lovely Patreon group who support this channel. I'll see you again soon, and happy painting. Bye.